everyone. I'm Dr. Jacqueline Duget, the host of What is Black podcast. Throughout the month of June, What is Black podcast episodes will be presented by Audible. I enjoy listening to books on Audible and excited to share that this month I'm launching What is Black's book club. Our pick for this month is Genesis Begins Again by Alicia D. Williams. Audible provides podcasts, wellness programs, Audible originals, and books that you'll enjoy as well. So sign up today for your free 30-day trial at www.audibletrial.com/whatisblack. That is www.audibletrial.com/whatisblack to get your copy of Genesis Begins Again by Alicia D. Williams. So hello everyone, I'm excited to have as one of our guests today, Alicia Williams. This is a special episode. I'm focusing on the issue of colorism. I've been wanting to do this episode for a while now. And so as part of today's episode, I'm saying it's a two-parter. I have my first special guest will be Alicia Williams. She's the author of Genesis Begins Again. And then for the second part of today's episode, I'm going to interview a psychologist. So we'll get some more tools and resources and share more information for parents to really delve into this conversation a little bit more. I think Alicia will do a great job as well. And we'll just use the power of both of these powerful women on today's episode to really elevate this conversation. And hopefully, I think these are important conversations, and I try to do that with each and every episode because these are issues that impact not only the children that we're raising, but also helping us as parents, our grandparents, guardians, whoever are caring for and loving our kids, to even kind of assess our own deep-seated issues or concerns or our own trauma related to colorism. So I want to get into the conversation and welcome Alicia Williams to the program. Welcome, Alicia.
Hi, thank you for having me, Jackie.
So excited. We had some really great pre-interview conversations, and we'll continue that conversation. So first and foremost, Alicia, if for people who don't know or haven't had an opportunity to read Genesis Begins Again, if you can tell us a little bit about Genesis Begins.
Sure.
Again, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Genesis Begins Again is about a 13-year-old girl named Genesis Anderson, and she hates herself. She hates her dark skin and her natural hair. And she believes that she's beautiful, like light-skinned mom with beautiful, long, flowing hair, just like her, then dad will love her. And if he loves her like he loves mom, then he'll do right and want to take care of the family. So all throughout this story, she goes about trying to change herself to look more like mom, to get dad's love and affection. So again, I mean, just describing the book, I'm getting goosebumps, right? Because I really enjoyed reading the book. In some ways, so let me go back. I did enjoy reading the book, but I can also tell you that I was also pained reading the book as well. The way it even starts out, I felt like, oh my God, this poor girl, I felt for her, right? The things that she was going through. So I just wanted to step back a little bit. Why was it important for you? This is your debut book, right? To focus on such a complex and complicated story, at the heart of the story of colorism. I wish I could say that it was something I set out to do. It wasn't intentional at all. It was a story that originated about a girl who happened to be dark-skinned with natural hair, but she was also heavy-set, and she was being bullied. And the story was about her encountering bullies, more so for her being thick, But as I delved deeper into the story, and I was told, too, that middle schoolers can't handle all of those issues, which maybe they can't handle them in a book. Maybe that's what they were trying to tell me. Maybe that's too much, streamline it. But I'm like, oh, no, our middle schoolers, kids can handle it. They're going through a lot. So as I got deeper into the story, I stripped away the heaviness and focused on the dark skin and the natural hair. And learning more about who she was and drawn off of experiences that I went through and even observed, having a light-skinned mom and a dark-skinned father, I pulled that in there. And the heart of the story was her really hating this dark skin
and where it comes from, and discovering, not even knowing why she hates it or that's the thing that she hates. It was the whole discovery of what is beauty and what makes you lovable, and what makes you, more importantly, unlovable. And those two things for her was the dark skin, natural hair, because that's what was like passed on to her, that made her, were the traits that made her unlovable. So it just really came with learning out who this girl was, and how does she deal with it, and where does she get this knowledge from? Why does she know that makes her unlovable, and who taught her that that's unlovable?
And I think for me, that really is the heart of the story as well. I mean, if you could have multiple hearts, right? I think there's so many touch points, right, for this character, and that's why I think there's a complexity, right? Because again, on the surface, it might sound like, oh, we're talking about a woe is me story, right? About this young girl who doesn't like how she looks on her hair, right? But again, you kind of so you go into the book and you know that that's what Genesis is struggling with, right? But over the series of chapters, right, that's where the complexity and the layers get built, where you start to realize that, that question about where does she get that from? Like, how does she know that she's not beautiful, right? What is being told to her that's reinforcing that message? And I thought that was very interesting, right? Because I would think that, maybe she's looking at magazines, right, and seeing a lot of white people or light-skinned people in the magazine, right? But that's not what you did, right? You really tackled the family dynamics, and I just wanted to talk a little bit more about that in terms of the family dynamics that influences Genesis' views about herself.
Yeah, I think it would be an easy way to just acknowledge already that the media and social media and magazines and television already has a lack of representation. So that is a given, but I think somebody that young may notice it but not really hone into it immediately. That's to say that some will, but it's almost like it's in the back of the head, like, hey, they don't have somebody that looks like me. But, we grew up like that. Like, oh, okay, they don't have it. Maybe we have good times. But it was like not enough. But we knew it was something that wasn't cool. It's just that we accepted it. And that's the way life is. So putting that aside, like, that is an easy way to say, oh, let's blame it all on this. But internally, I knew that this was something so much richer and deeper, because it happens in families and households, not just across America, but across the globe. Colorism exists in every colonized country. So I thought about, in the family dynamic, we send these messages to our kids that they're not good enough. But how and why, right? So she gets it from her dad that she's not beautiful. And it's the little things. It's the little things as well as the outright things. It's the comparison to what is beautiful. It's the lack of affirmation or confirmation that you're good enough. So I needed to tackle it within the family because I grew up with it. And I felt like that. I wasn't as pretty as my light-skinned mom. I wasn't as pretty as none of my cousins on that light-skinned side. I've got compared a lot. You look like your daddy. You got dark gums like your daddy. You got hair like your daddy. I didn't necessarily, I knew I wasn't as pretty as my light-skinned cousins because that light skin was preferential, and I didn't have hair like that side of the family, but I knew I didn't necessarily want to look like my dad's side. But I also observed it. When our grandmothers took us to church, who was getting complimented? The long hair, pretty girls. You just so pretty with that long hair. You look so smart. Oh, you just, they got the compliments. We might have gotten something, you have a nice personality. I saw it in friends and how they were treated and how guys treated girls. So I thought so much deeper about this. It's happening everywhere, in the home, outside the home, and this is our community. But why don't we ever talk about it? Now I realize this is something that we don't talk about. You can talk if somebody outside of our race comes at us and attacks our people, we'll come together and fight you down. But when you have a grandmother telling their grandchild, "Ooh, don't play in the sun. You look too dark like that," we don't correct it. That was so important to me because it existed from generation to generation since we married up, and since slavery days, from when we had the field and the house servants. So that was something like, if we know this and we do this, so much so that we have the hashtag Team Light Skin and hashtag Team Dark Skin, then why aren't we addressing it? Why don't we correct our own family? Why do I have to protect my daughter from bringing around certain family members because I don't want them to put it in her head that she's going to be less than because she's chocolate? So that's why it was so important. I didn't want the bear or the grunt to be on, outside places, because we never handle what happens inside our home. We never hold people accountable inside our home.
And I agree, right? Because I think I've had similar experiences on the opposite side, right? So I am, and I think most of my listeners know, I'm biracial, I'm light skinned, and in some instances, right, some people might say that I'm ambiguous. And then growing up knowing that skin color mattered, right? It's like you knew it was there, it was in the media, and then it's kind of like, well, I don't want to continue to perpetuate that, right? Because I know that they're, this team light skin, team dark skin. You just reminded me of like when I was younger, right? I was at the age when School Days first came out, right?
Yeah.
I'm probably like high school. Well, maybe not. Maybe a little bit older. So maybe late high school, early college when School Days came out. Yes. Yeah. And it's true, right? And it's like almost like over 20 years ago, maybe closer to 30 years ago now. It's like you're saying, it still exists today. And I think you speak to it, right? We don't talk about it, and even if we do talk about it, it's talked about. There's we're angry, right? And I think rightfully so, because of because I call it trauma, the historical systemic racism that's led to internalized racism, in some instances for us to disparage one another and create these schisms within our own culture, and how that now impacts our children. So I kind of want to delve into that a little bit in terms of the intergenerational piece, right? So you mentioned how Genesis has a light-skinned mom, a dark-skinned father, right? But then I think what's also interesting is, again, there's this intergenerational piece, right? Later on in the book, right, there are opportunities where you find out mom's history and the contributions from grandmother and great-grandparents, right? And then you also finally hear the contribution of the dad's, the trauma that dad faced.
Right.
And so I kind of wanted to talk about that as well, in terms of how as parents we perpetuate things, and I think you sort of alluded to it before, things that get said or things that get done, because I know there's a scene in the book. I'm just excited about the book, so I'm sorry if I'm all over the place. There's a scene in the book where Genesis talks with her mom, and we kind of talked about this pre-interview, and she talks about how, I think either she internalizes, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, where Genesis kind of thinks to herself, well, her mom always fusses with her hair, right? Her mom doesn't want her to get a relaxer. But the thing she says about her hair, her mom doesn't believe that she's contributing to how Genesis is feeling, right? But the fact that you show that juxtaposition of mom has made comments. Mom makes comments about, oh, your hair is so tough, right? Don't get it wet. So I just want to talk about that as well. How those subtle things, kids pick up on even those subtle things that we don't. Or they're implicit, right? But they're not explicit. I would hope a parent does not purposely try to disparage their child, right? But those are things that we learn that are then passed on to our kids.
Right. And I would hope parents don't, but I've witnessed enough parents do. I've witnessed, you ain't gonna be the whole what dad went through. I've witnessed it, it happening, and it hurt me so much that these kids were so powerless but to be told that they weren't going to ever be anything, you black this, you black that, from a dark-skinned parent. And I thought, where would this anger come from? Where is it coming from? But then on the flip side, it's the subtle things too, right? Because mom does say, y'all got to deal with this tangled mess. Oh, it's never a thing of beauty or a thing of what they say, the crowning glory, right? It's a mess, it's a hassle, it's a burden. And so these words and how we use them already tells us that if it's a burden to you, then it's a burden to me. If I can't play in the sun, or you mentioned, oh, my mom does it all the time, and I'm like, Mom, I wrote a book about it. Oh, you got dark, and this might be an observation, but it's the tone that she uses it in, right? Oh, you don't want to do that, because if you do that, then you'll have that. So we tend to have it in, and so the thing is, Jackie, I think people it's so ingrained that they don't even think that they're favor colorism. I think it's so ingrained in some, because I don't think like people I know think of themselves as prejudiced against dark and light skinned people. I think it's so ingrained to say, oh, he's so handsome to be so dark. She's so cute to be. It is so ingrained that when I hear it, I'm like, did you hear what you said? What? Did you hear that you called him, he's handsome, to be dark? Oh, I didn't mean anything by it. It's like, oh, but you have to understand, you think that way even subliminally, that he can't be handsome if he's not light-skinned, but he's an exception. So we get this whole treatment, and I think back, growing up, my brother had to have he only dated light-skinned girls. And he had to have them with colored eyes. And my cousins on my mom's side only dated light-skinned girls with colored eyes. And I thought, oh gosh, he's never telling me that I'm not cute. My brother's not telling me I'm ugly. My cousins are not telling me I'm ugly. But they're showing me that I am. They're showing me that I'm not lovable, because they would never date somebody that looks like me. So we do these, and we don't even realize how ingrained it is. So we don't have to be verbally abusive and like a dad was. We could do it just like grandma was. Internally, I think, you'll have an easier life if you're light-skinned, because that provides privilege. And what do I see? I see who's getting arrested, who has the lower jobs. Historically, who are the laborers? If you don't look like them, then you have an easier life. And I wonder if we're still thinking that way, because we've always thought that with the whole brown bag then. That meant if you're darker than the brown bag, then you can't be in certain families. You couldn't have certain jobs. You weren't allowed in certain churches. That whole colorism was so ingrained. Even sororities. Back in the day, sororities were definitely with the whole color, right? And even today, there is a stigma. AKAs are the light-skinned ones with the pretty hair. Sigma, Gamma, Rho, and Deltas are the dark-skinned ones with it. So do we do it purposely? Some of us, definitely. There's a whole of us. But then there's some of us who are just, that's the way it's been.
And I think, the way to sort of, and that's my hope, right, to have these conversations. Everyone's going to have their own personal experience, their own family experience. But again, just I think sharing opportunities to talk about, like you said, like these really tough topics that I think are definitely ingrained, right? It's since the inception of this country, as well as other countries, in terms of how we create status, how we determine status, how do we determine beauty, how do we determine who's worthy, based on something as as superficial as color of the skin. I mean, it's not superficial in the sense that it's, it's like, race is a construct, but in our society, because of our racial classifications, because of, power and privilege that's ascribed to someone because of the color of their skin or lack of the color of their skin, it's like, it's crazy, right? And I really see this as a legacy of racism that has caused this ingrainedness of our negativity, and how we're dividing ourselves. Not all of us are doing it, but it's enough so that, like you said, so you're an educator, right? And you can probably speak more to your personal experiences, even that you've seen in the classroom, right? We all know that this exists, right? And our kids, this is just one extra thing, an extra burden that our kids have to deal with. But if we don't talk about it, if we don't have an opportunity to find space to talk about it, then it'll continue, right? No one's going to share the suffering that they're going through unless we're willingly being open to talking about these important topics.
Right. But, and I just don't know if kids had especially our younger kids, younger than middle school, had the vocabulary or the experience to associate what they're feeling about the color. So definitely when I was working in kindergarten for 6 years, I think we might have chatted, or you heard this before, but for those who didn't, me working in kindergarten kind of opened my eyes. Now, I was at a predominantly white school. So every year we get a mix, maybe 2 or 3 kids of color, different nationalities. But they knew any brown skin, they knew that it was not acceptable. And how did we know this? Now, most teachers would never pick up on it. But I happened to be in a classroom with a Mexican American and me. So we're both brown skin. We noticed, we started paying attention. Why is it that our kids of color, any brown skin, whether they're African American, whether they're Indian, whether they're Korean, they did not choose the skin tones. Now, multicultural crayons and multicultural pencils and markers, they did not choose the skin tone that matches their skin color. Now, our Caucasian kids, they did. They would actually choose every skin tone. And if they drew their family portraits, they may color in mom or dad brown skin because they saw them as tanned. They did not have a limitation or an apprehension when it came to picking up a crayon for the color of their skin. But our kids, they would not choose it. And maybe towards the middle of the school year, we could see them, after encouraging them, like, matching the crayon up to their skin and affirming them. Yes, this is yours. They would take the crayon, but they would shade it in so lightly. At the end of the school year, they're with the other peers by that point, and they're, doing what they have kids on day one have done. They'll press in deeper, but they would not press in that crayon or accept the color. Every now and then you had some that did, but there's distinctly kids who knew that was not acceptable. And I thought, where would they get that? They know that their hair texture was different. They knew it was big and bushy because they was said they hated their hair after looking at the other girls, the finer hair. They knew it because of the things that they say, or the tears, being in the bathroom. Why is she in the bathroom? We go check. She's in the bathroom trying to press down her hair. We knew it because after girls being in kindergarten, first grade and second grade, by the time they're, in fourth and fifth, after parents stop braiding and doing ponytails, they get them hair straightened. And that's when they got affirmation from other teachers. We're like, no, don't tell them they're beautiful now because they have straight hair, right? Because you didn't validate them when they were younger struggling with the puffy hair. So they knew that they weren't beautiful until they started changing themselves. Why did they know it? I had a little girl who would not go in the sun. I was like, Joshna, please, it's so pretty out here. She would try to avoid going out during the recess and being anywhere near the sun. Even walking to it, she would try to get into the shade. And I thought that's got to be hard. What is she gaining? What is she getting at home? What messages? And why don't we have any? How are we tackling it if we do see it? Now, we tackled it in our classroom. We had the books, of different books up displayed around the room. We read books. I like my color, skin tone books. We read them all. We read books featuring kids of color in the illustrations, just to show that there's not only a reflection of who you are, but kids of color, that's not of color need to see what beauty is as well. See something that's not a default. So we tried so much to tackle it. However, that's just us. So what happens on a bigger scale when people don't even acknowledge that these subliminal messages are happening, that they're screaming to say, I'm not good enough. Do you not see it? They don't have the words to say it. Or that the greater world is acknowledging beauty as more European, like with the hair. So, yeah, I see it. They don't have the vocabulary, or they don't know how to express that. They just know something, right? By the time they grow older, it might even be too late because it's already so ingrained that they hate it, they don't fit in, that they're already changing themselves to assimilate.
Now, being an educator, do you, and I think we talked about this a little briefly as well in the pre-interview. I was thinking, as you were writing the book, right? I mean, I know you set out to write about Genesis, right? But were you really thinking in terms of writing the book that, okay, I would use my teacher background, my experience as well, to have a book that could be a tool to help parents?
Oh, no, I didn't. I'm sorry. And I wrote the book because it happened so organically. Everything in that book happened so organically through every revision and every conversation I had with someone else. There would be a connection. I could be in the theater and see something, and that's why. I'll read something, and it'd make the story even deeper. I never set out like, this is a book about colorism, and this is going to be used in the classroom, and this is going to have some conversations. No, I didn't even think people would read the book. I knew it was going to be out, but I didn't think I didn't think it would be where it is now. So I was afraid to write the book. I started it while I was in graduate school, and it was a low residency. So I was only there twice a year for 2 weeks, and I worked one-on-one with an advisor. But I was told by the only African-American faculty member that I had, while I was, trying to figure out the story, I was told not to write it. She didn't tell me why, but she told me, not to write it. And I got discouraged, and I went on to something else. And my last semester, it was another teacher, and she said, hey, I need to see something you've been working on. All the other teachers thought it was something I should pursue, except that one African-American teacher. I said, nope, I'm not going to work on it. I was told not to work on it. She's like, I want to see the manuscript. I was like, no, I put it away. I'm on to something else. She's like, I need to see it. I said, I'm done. She said, send me the manuscript. I sent it to her, and she said, I don't think it's the writing. I think it's the story. I think it rubbed her raw. And that fear of, oh my gosh, this lady who is esteemed, who is an excellent writer, if she's the voice of and the pulse of what literature might be acceptable, and it rubbed her raw, I shouldn't pursue this story. Because if I try to pursue this story, people will tear me up. That's not how, we don't talk about this. We don't air our dirty laundry. We don't, we sweep it under the rug. And I was so afraid that if I pursued this, and it turns out that I did pursue it, and it did get published, but I still held my breath. And I did not know if our people who were ready, if we were ready to talk about colorism.
Well,
so I never even thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can understand that that vulnerability, because I like listening to Brene Brown. But again, this courage and bravery that you had to write the book, I can understand the hesitancy, the trepidation, right, the concern. Mm-hmm. But again, I think it's such an important topic, right? And I think this is the ultimate case of, right, you got to write your story, right? You got to write the story that is calling you, right? And again, so when I listened to your interview on NPR, the person who interviewed you talked about, like, made a comparison. I thought that was an amazing comparison to Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye. And how did you feel about? I mean, you're your own individual writer, but again, I'm just thinking, like, what she may have gone through in her time to write this book, The Bluest Eye, and then now for our generation, for these young people this time, there's your book, Genesis Begins Again.
Oh yes, Ari Shapiro with he threw me some hard questions, mm-hmm. But so he got that from the New York Times. They reviewed it for their middle school book selection. So I was very fortunate, so seeing it in print in that paper. It was a twofold. I was ecstatic because that meant they chose this book, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh my gosh, they chose this book out of all the books. But it terrified me because it held a standard to someone who we know is like the epitome of what, a literary scholar, the whole canon of the literary canon. So I could not, as a debut author, be compared. And I was like, okay. But when you take a step back, there is some relief writing for middle school that it's literary, but it does, what I see what they're saying is it captures that Bluest Eye is Cola wanting blue eyes to be beautiful, right? Mm-hmm. But dealing with the angst of not even knowing why she feels that way. Too much to the point where she tears up her dolls, right? She tore up these white dolls, or she hated the white girl. But in this hate that I don't know where it's coming from, but I know it's a legitimate feeling that I'm getting from somewhere. So it says to me that I'm onto something here, that they saw that I was enough onto something that is in that vein of this conversation that is only touched on every so often. So I'm so lucky that they said that The Bluest Eye, because if it touched that vein of self-hate and internalized racism, this whole topic that we don't always, we address and we'll talk about, but then we'll let go. Like School Days, we addressed, we laughed at it, we sang with it, and we let it go, right? And so hopefully with the middle school, they put this in there with the words that make people like, I see now. This is something we need to tackle. If they did one thing for me, is for people to pay attention that this is something we need to tackle. Toni Morrison already brought it there, but we need to tackle it at an earlier age.
Because I totally agree with you with that. And I think that's, I really don't like to compare people, but if you're going to be compared to somebody, I think Toni Morrison is like, that's a great compliment. I think us writing about a topic, right, mm-hmm. that we don't like to tackle, but if it's anything that I'm appreciating is that is, like you said, the bravery of tackling something and revealing it with this ugliness and the rawness of like making us face ourselves, making us face and hold accountable. This is something that, look at the kids. Pecola was a kid. Not Pecola. That's not I'm thinking Pecola is the one that got pregnant. The other main character that's telling the narrator. Mm-hmm. But, those were children. And you hear that the adults didn't even pay attention to what was going on enough. Or the trauma that was happening in that book. They weren't even tuning into the trauma that they were going to have
they're putting on their children, and they will be on their grandchildren.
But you know what I loved? I just want to talk a little bit about the agency of your main character, Genesis. Because I mean, as a parent, as I'm reading the book, right, because the parents had their own dysfunction, and they were caught up in their, survival. And I was thinking, like, oh, they're missing something. Why don't they know that their daughter is suffering? Why don't they know this, right? And I think as parents, right, stuff happens, and we give as much love and as we can at the time, right? And so I can understand where how you created those parents. But I'm going to go back to the agency. Genesis was finally brave enough to tell her parents, right, individually, her mom, what she was going through, and her dad, what was going through. And I think that's so real, right? I think there are times when I think, even with my own kids, right, they've said something and it's like, oh my God, right? It's a wake up moment. It's a light bulb moment. It's like, okay, I've got to get engaged and I've got to ask the questions, and then you also feel the shame and guilt, right? Oh my God, I can't believe this happened to me. But I love that even layered in reality check and complexity of the role parents can play, right? Or sometimes what we're missing, with the things that are happening with our kids.
We're all guilty of that.
Yes.
Life is busy. We're handling bills. We're juggling work. We don't slow down to tune in. And you made me think of I was at a conference and on a panel, and afterwards a young girl, and I was rushing to get to another panel, but she stopped me, and it was so much in her voice. And she said, if she has issues like this, how does she make her mom listen? Right? What is the whole idea? That's a lot. And that's a lot to ask. I said, that's a lot to ask you to make your mom listen when, we're the moms, we're the dads. It's our duty. It's our duty to listen, our duty to care for them, to nurture them, to be there, be present, right? But we don't. So, and I said, what I'm going to ask you to do is, I need you to be brave. It's so hard, because I had to do this with my daughter. I had to do it with my daughter because I missed something very important she was going through. Be brave. And I need you to tell her, set a space in the house. And this is where you go. This one space. And even if you have to have a talking stick to make her say, this is what I need you to look in my eyes when you hold this stick. I need you to hear me. No, do nothing else. And go to that sacred space that you have dedicated to be your safe space to talk, right? And so we try to come up with this plan. I don't know, that was in a different state, so I never would know. But the idea of, that's what I told my daughter. I'm glad you're brave. Our kids have to be brave. Not all of them are, but they're screaming. They're doing things in other ways to let you know they're hurting or they're dealing with something. When you come home from school and how's everything? Fine. It's not fine. We don't slow down to say, what does fine mean? What does okay mean? Tell me, So I'm glad Genesis was brave. I don't think I was that brave. I wish I were, but
again, like you said, you I think you spoke, you spoke truth to the experience of parents, right? It doesn't matter what socioeconomic level you are, right? There's stuff that you have to deal with, right? And sometimes that stuff detracts us from the parenting part. But what I love about the reality of this book is that despite the other stuff the parents were going through, right? When Genesis needed them to listen, they listened, right? I probably would have liked it, if this was real life. I shake a parent. It's like, okay, this should have been done in this scene, in this chapter, right? But it's real, right? And that speaks to parents. And that's why, again, I love the power of books. And I love the power of this book. Because as a parent, like you said, life happens and parenting is tough, right? And sometimes we miss those cues that our kids give us. But again, opportunities.
Yeah, we figured that out.
Yes. Right. Like a book like this, right? If we read with our kids or,
the opportunities to ask those questions, or your great suggestion of creating a space, right? Creating opportunities where, like you said, the child holds the stick and speaks, and your parent listens, and vice versa, right? So there's small things that we can do that are impactful things, that are quality things, that I think will slowly help us sort of address this. And then I also wanted to briefly mention again, or kind of go back to your point about writing a book for middle schoolers and why it was so important to tackle it for this age. And why did you say that was so significant to think that it's important to talk about it younger? Like we talked about the bluest eye before, it's more for older kids, but why it was so important to really tackle it for kids and this young age, the middle grade age range.
Since I didn't know what the story was about, I did hear her voice. And Genesis came to me as a 13-year-old. She pretty much took over this story as when it started developing. Her voice became so real to me that it woke me up in the middle of the night. Like, nope, that's not how I would say it. That's not true. And I think, in retrospect, if I tried to control it, I would have said make it older, because maybe the kids are on social media and they're seeing, Black China hawking bleaching creams. They see the light skin versus dark skin. I thought maybe, but now that I honor Genesis' voice, I'm so glad, because kids are so open at this age to hear and make these decisions. And at this age, I see that readers from all nationalities are seeing themselves in this. And they can see without stepping back like, oh, this is only a book about colorism. They're seeing themselves in it, which it seems to me so much more powerful, because it makes them get deeper into this whole psychological thing without being too deep. Another thing with it being 13 in middle school, I think kids can handle it. We coddle our kids a lot and saying not ready. They're just not ready, where I hear it a lot. And at the school I'm working at, they're not ready. They're too young. They're dealing with stuff, and they can handle it. And they need to see how other kids that deal with stuff handle things. I think it's a prime age, and I'm very lucky in the manner of writing at 13 and the way the language is that I have older readers in high school. But 13 was that age that came to me. I wish I could take the credit, but that voice came out just like that.
Oh, that's amazing. And then before we end, because this conversation went definitely longer than I had anticipated, and I'm looking forward to sharing this whole conversation with my audiences. So my next guest, that'll be the part 2 of this episode. But I did want to talk to you a little bit more about the title, Genesis Begins Again. And I mean, I like to think, kind of get deep with stuff. I was thinking, again, I'm just wondering if it's intentional, right? The fact that Genesis begins again, and Genesis is really a beginning.
Yeah, I know it wasn't. I didn't even name it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I had several different working titles, and 100 Reasons Why, I think, was one of them, because she has this list that she keeps of reasons why she hates herself. But it was another title too close to it, like 13 Reasons Why. I had The End of the World, because, in middle school, when things happen, you just feel like it's the end of the world. And somebody told me that was a little bit too morbid. So I had to change it. And so it went through several working titles. But when I signed the deal with Simon & Schuster, it came back with that title. They gave it that title, but somehow it just worked.
But again, towards the end of the book, there's a reference to Genesis beginning again.
Yeah, well, that because I didn't have the ending, I didn't know how to end the story, but I knew I didn't want it to be, she magically loves herself and everything is so, rose-colored glasses, because that's not life. Mm-hmm. Even as adults, we still struggle with some childhood stuff. And we still struggle with self-acceptance. We're in the mirror trying to see why we got love handles, right? We're hating certain things. And it's not always, I love myself just the way I am. So but I needed to have hope. And so it just came together, and I thought that part was me adding that line in there. And I thought it was being clever.
No, I think you did a marvelous job with that. Because again, it's like, oh my God, I finally get it, right? Because again, I was trying to think, like, when I first picked up the book, I'm saying, okay, how does Genesis begin again tie into the story, right? Like, how does this really depict the story? And then again, like, you take us full circle, right? You take us back to kind of where she starts out in a way, right? And there's this opportunity to sort of reimagine herself, but I know she's still going to struggle, right? Because she's just 13, right? Well, not I should say just 13. It kind of makes it, sound like, but she is 13 and she still has her whole life ahead of her. But I think that's such a great lesson, even at that age, to start to feel about, learn about self-acceptance, having an opportunity to be brave. Because there are many instances where she has to step out and be brave as well. It's not just about accepting herself, right? But it's all the things as a middle schooler you've got to deal with, like the mean girls, mm-hmm. Friends and new schools, right? So she lives a full life, right? I don't want to just make the story. It's not just about colorism, right? She does struggle with identity, but it's the coming of age, right? And we all have, like you said, all have stuff that we have to deal with, that we're going through at that age. To deal with racism, to deal with internalized racism, that's a lot heavier, right? But
she's funny too, so that's why she's flawed. She's funny. I hope she's likable, I think. Mm-hmm. Which I needed to have some humor. I think a lot of more humor was edited out, but I wanted her to be likable. But she has suffered. You're right. She has gone through a lot in this book, but she comes out. And our kids, I have to say, and you'll know this now even more, our kids go through so much. And just imagine, I've gone to schools, and we've done, if it's an intimate class, or intimate group, they're dealing with mental health issues. They're dealing with suicide. They're dealing with bullying, low self-esteem. They're dealing with lack of confidence and loneliness and isolation. And they're dealing with so much that I think that's why people are able to see themselves in stories, and it gives them some kind of hope.
Yeah, and I think how you kind of help create that hope, the friend group that she has, like, and again, despite the fact that, family has some struggles, they're still there for her, right? Or they're there mm-hmm. as much as they can be. So I think that, that really, to me, also makes it, again, just gets back to the reality, right? Life happens, but again, we have to be willing to get to a place where, as parents, we need to show up when we need to show up. Take those cues and listen to our kids. And I think this is a great conversation starter. There's so much, and then we didn't even talk about the books, the music that's also referenced throughout the book. Now that's again too, like those the music and the artists that you feature in the book. Ella Fitzgerald, Etta James, and I forget.
Billie Holiday.
Yes, Billie Holiday. Yes.
Beyonce, Rihanna. I mean, everybody's in Motown. Everybody's in this story. I didn't realize until I reread it. And then there's so many little references. Miles Davis, she mentions. But the one she studied heavily are the three: Etta James, Ella Fitzgerald, and Billie Holiday.
Because I was wondering, again, I always like to also get into the minds of writers as well, the intention of the connection of that music to the story. Because I think, again, she points out, I think the character really kind of finds something in them, right, that reflects back to her.
It was a lot of fine tuning to get to that point, because I just visualized that Genesis would eventually create a wall that will be reflective of people that she would admire, right? And initially, it was so many people that I could think of. I even had this girl that flew a plane that lived in, I think, California, a young girl, the first girl who flew a plane at her age. And she was African-American as well. And I thought, hey, she should go on the wall. So I was just thinking of all the people that she would read about. But as the story was revised and edited and streamlined, and she was in chorus, it just came. And I think it started off with Billie Holiday, because I honestly remember the very first time I heard Billie Holiday. And I remember, not the very first time I heard her in headphones, like the big DJ headphones. I was in the library too. And I remember, oh my gosh, this woman is incredible. And I think that's why I put Billie, but then everything else just kind of happened. And as I listened and wrote with Billie, I was like, who else would I like to listen to and write to? And it flowed.
Oh, I think this is an amazing book. I'm so happy that I've had the opportunity to speak with you about the book, and have had the opportunity to read it. I was like, got to make sure I finish reading the book for the interview today, because we're all a little bit busy with coronavirus going on, but this was definitely a nice a treat for me to get away from coronavirus and have an opportunity
thank you.
to read this wonderful book. Thank you so much, Alicia.
Thank you. Appreciate it
so much. You're so welcome. Thanks for joining us this week on What is Black podcast. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And for more information about the podcast, our blogs, and subscribe to our upcoming newsletter, go to our website at whatisblack.co. As always, subscribe to the show to catch every new episode. And don't forget to leave us a review so we can continue to bring you fresh content. Until next time, thank you for listening.